Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I hope that your day's off to a good start. Mine is so far. Pardon me, I've got to let the boss out. This morning, it's a ship mug. I behind the wheel and the verse, they that go down to the sea in the ships. So I'm not certain about y'all, but I've really enjoyed over the last month or so going back and just sort of looking into the background for the books of the Bible. And so far I'm just going in order. We began with Genesis, and now we're up to Jeremiah and Lamentations. When we get to the minor prophets, when we get to the minor 12 prophets, I'll have to step away from doing them in order in the Bible so that we can do them in chronological order. It seems like to me that might make it easier. So today we get to Jeremiah and Lamentations. And Jeremiah he is frequently called the weeping prophet. And one more interesting little fun fact, Jeremiah, depending upon how you tabulate things, is the longest book in the Bible. If you count 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel as separate books, like we do in our translations, Jeremiah is the longest book in the Bible. If you like, in Hebrew words, because it's written in Hebrew, it is the longest book in the Bible. Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles are longer if you count them as one book, and they were originally written as one book, or that's the common thought. But he is definitely the longest prophetic book. Isaiah has more chapters. Isaiah has 66 chapters. Jeremiah only has 50 some. But obviously the chapters are longer in Isaiah. The verses are longer, and of course the chapter and verse numberings aren't in the original text. The division into chapters and verses was like in the Middle Ages. So first, a little bit about the prophet Jeremiah. He is a prophet active in the last years before the Babylonians conquered Judah and Jerusalem. He had the misfortune of being perpetually hated by the kings of Judah because, well, he gave them bad news. He told them what they didn't want to hear, and so they didn't like it. There's always saying, don't blame me, I'm the messenger. Well, he was the messenger and they blamed him. And traditionally, he's considered to be the author of Jeremiah and Lamentations. So it's easy to nail him down in history. He had a prophetic ministry that lasted 40 years, from 627 to 587 BC. His ministry began in 627 during the reign of the last of the good kings. The last of the good kings was a man named Josiah, and he did his very best to steady the ship, reroute the ship, whatever phrase you want to use. But as the old saying goes, it was too little too late. And the kings after him were hopelessly corrupt. And as the writer of Kings says, they were all evil. And at the end of his life, or near the end of his life, apparently he was carried to Egypt sort of against his will as the Babylonians were at the gates. There were some Judeans who escaped southward to Egypt as the Babylonians were coming in, and apparently they carried Jeremiah with them against his will. Jeremiah's counsel had been not to try to escape, that what was happening to them was the will of God and not to escape, but apparently he was carried against his will to Egypt. So, a bit about the book of Jeremiah. It's the longest book. It's the longest book in the Bible. Again, depending upon how you count things, definitely the longest prophetic book. It is a really varied book in terms of type of writing. There's some poetry in it. There are recorded sermons, some that appear to be just texts of sermons that Jeremiah spoke, as well as written sermons. There's some history in there. There are oracles against foreign powers, as well as lots and lots of warnings to the Judean kings and their elite about the fate and the state of the nation. One of the recurring themes in Jeremiah is God's faithfulness, their unfaithfulness. Judah's unfaithfulness is going to cause calamity. The calamity that's coming is not because God has forgotten them, but rather because they have forgotten God. They haven't been faithful to the covenant. It's important when we read Jeremiah also to really remember context. If Jeremiah speaks about a nation from the north invading, he is not talking about Russia invading Ukraine or Israel or anybody else. When you read Jeremiah or the other prophetic books, think just about the circumstance. Think about the circumstance. They have broken the covenant, and the result is impending doom. One of the other things that you'll read a lot about in the book of Jeremiah is prophecy itself, the nature of prophecy, and false prophets, true prophets, and over again Jeremiah rails against the false prophets. And the false prophets are those who are saying that all is well. In the book of Jeremiah, he rails against false prophets, and they are the ones who are saying, that things are great. We have it all made. God is on our side. I know it looks bad, but God's going to save us. And they are the false prophets. In this case, the prophet that is announcing impending doom is the one who is true. The false prophet is the one who is saying that everything is great. Everything is great. God's going to deliver us. It doesn't look so good right now, but help is on the way. And no, Jeremiah says, it's not looking good right now, and it's going to get worse because you've been unfaithful. God's not going to save you, Jeremiah says. Now, Jeremiah the book is, a lot of it is not very optimistic. But it's not without hope either. For in the middle of it, we have the promise of a new covenant. We have the promise of a new covenant we find in Jeremiah 30. And we also find here and there promises of restoration, that after the calamity that's coming, God will restore them. But on the whole, it's difficult reading, because he's got a really difficult message. He's got a difficult message. You have forsaken the covenant. You have broken the covenant over and over and over again. You have trampled on the needy. You have oppressed the poor. You have worshipped every god under the sun. And because of that, disaster is coming. Now, the other book that gets attributed to Jeremiah is Lamentations. That follows right after Jeremiah. We don't read Lamentations very much. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and then Ezekiel and Daniel, etc. Lamentations is technically anonymous in that the name of the author isn't listed in the book. It's normally thought that the prophet Jeremiah wrote Lamentations, but again, technically it's anonymous. Lamentations begins this way. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become. She who is great among the nations. She who is a princess among the provinces has become a slave. How lonely sits the people is full of people. How like a widow has she become. She who is great among the nations, she who is a princess among the provinces, has become a slave. Lamentations takes the same basic theological viewpoint as Jeremiah, Isaiah, the other prophets, Kings, and Samuel. That viewpoint is this: they have forsaken the covenant. They have forsaken the covenant, and they have reaped the consequences of that. The consequences being destruction. God has not been unfaithful with them. They were unfaithful to God, and they are just gotten the consequences, the natural results. Lamentations is not a book that we read from a lot. When was the last time you just picked up Lamentations to read through it? It's not one that gets preached from a lot. I did do a series of sermons 3 years ago, in the winter or spring of 21, that was drawn in part from Lamentations, but we don't preach from a lot. We don't read from it a lot. And that's unfortunate, because there is something valuable in it. It is a lament, and we societally don't lament very well. We have sort of lost that ability. We yell and scream a lot. We yell and scream at each other even when things are going great. But there's almost an art to biblical lament. And so this book can be helpful. This can be worthwhile reading. In it when you read Lamentations, we're grieving. And grieving is healthy. Grieving is a natural, healthy process. Lamenting is natural and healthy. So if you're in a period of grief, Lamentations is not light reading. but it's good and it's helping. If you're in there goes the police after somebody. If you're in a dark period, and we know that it happens, turn to Lamentations. And 3 years ago, I guess it was, 4 years ago almost, we were just coming out of the pandemic. And churches, all of our churches were down in the mouth. We lost all of our people. And the people hadn't come back to worship yet. And it was a helpful series of sermons because we're lamenting what had been lost. We were lamenting what had been lost, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. So Jeremiah and Lamentations. Those two books are written by the prophet Jeremiah. It was called the weeping prophet because he wept over Jerusalem. He wept over Jerusalem. Okay, the last thing I'll mention is a bit of historical trivia. Historical trivia. In the 1600s, there was a type of sermon that was developed in New England called Jeremiads, after the prophet Jeremiah. The settlers in New England that came first to Massachusetts were of good Puritan stock, and the Puritans were as conservative, stiff, and straight-laced as any people could ever be. And in the middle of the 1600s, the good Puritan divines up there were convinced that their society was bound for destruction. As we would say, their society was going to hell in a handbasket. And so they railed and they railed and they railed in their sermons. And those sermons were called Jeremiads, after the sermons and the message of the prophet Jeremiah. A little bit of historical trivia there. Anyway, pick up your Bible sometime. Pick up your Bible. Turn to Jeremiah and read a little bit. Turn to Lamentations and read a little bit. Anyway, with that, I hope that you have a great rest of your Wednesday.